will set you free," suggested the slogan on the Iron Gate, but there was no freedom under SS rule. Critics of the regime were locked up indefinitely without trial or jury. Heinrich Himmler's grandniece Katrin is the only descendant willing to talk publicly about him and his reign of terror.
I think he had a certain leaning towards sadism, but I also think that what was much more pronounced in him was his conviction that all this had to be done, that he was fulfilling his duty, and that sometimes you have to be tough and take tough measures. And this is something he doesn't just practice on his opponents, but also on his own SS men.
Himmler's rule of terror in Munich made an impact across the country. Regional leaders across Germany appointed him to enforce political order. As more states fell under his jurisdiction, Himmler and his SS were able to counter their main rivals within the Nazi movement, the Brown Shirts, or SA. Rumors circulated that the SA was planning a coup.
Since the 1920s, there had been a strong competition between these two paramilitarian organizations of the Nazi Party, between the Brown Shirts and the Black Shirts, the SS. And Himmler had managed to put the SS in a position that it could serve as a kind of internal police of the Nazi leadership against the rebellious SA.
The SA Brown Shirts were led by Ernst Röhm. He was the second most powerful man in the Reich. Even Himmler's SS was under his command.
When Hitler came to power, it was Röhm who thought that Hitler wasn't going far enough. And as a result, Hitler realized that the SA, which was very powerful, would represent not only a threat to Hitler's grip on power, but also the army and the armed forces were complaining about the SA and its might. And Hitler basically had to choose between the armed forces and the SA. And famously, of course, we get the Night of the Long Knives in 1934, in which Hitler basically eradicates the SA leadership. I mean, literally eradicates.
Himmler's SS was deployed with ruthless efficiency to eradicate their brown shirt rivals. As for the SA chief, Ernst Röhm, Hitler dealt with him personally. Röhm had no idea of the long knives that had been drawn against him. He was on holiday, tucked up in a bed and breakfast on a Bavarian lake, when his Führer and former comrade burst in with a band of SS men. Arrested on the spot, the following day he was dead, shot by an SS general in a prison cell. SS chief Heinrich Himmler had eradicated a potential threat to Hitler's supreme command, and by doing so, had also eliminated his most powerful rival in the Nazi regime.
After the SA leadership was murdered on Hitler's order, Himmler was in a dominant position. He actually had eliminated his most important opponents and rivals.
The 1934 Nuremberg rally was staged that autumn. Just 1.5 years after Hitler's rise to power, Himmler had become one of the Nazi elite. His SS was now 200,000 strong. Hitler supported and rewarded his security chief. 2 years later, he would give Himmler command of the entire German police force. Seen here, striding beside Hitler in SS black, Himmler had quite literally become the Führer's right-hand man.
The existence of the SS meant absolute security from Hitler's point of view. And that was a system which was not based on a concept of law and order. It was a terror system, and terror was even used against the German population. It's the unpredictable nature of this terror which made the SS so efficient from Hitler's point of view. So even people who were telling jokes or were some sort of troublemakers could suddenly find themselves under the terror of the SS.
Himmler's agents, his eyes and ears, were everywhere. No one was safe. Even friends and Nazi Party comrades feared the SS chief, who had the ultimate power to pry into the private affairs of anyone in the Reich. But Himmler made sure that his own private life was strictly protected. Few knew about his secret affair and the letters he received that ended with the words, "Forget me not." They were signed with one of the SS chief's beloved Germanic runes, one of the same symbols etched into his so-called skull ring. Heinrich Himmler's attitude to women seems to have changed throughout his career. In the 1920s, his brother and best friend both found girlfriends, while the young student Heinrich struggled to find love or sex. He painted himself as a lonesome mercenary, suggesting in his diary that he would rather go to battle than go to bed with a woman.
Even during his student days, he already prescribed himself a strict code of abstinence until he would marry. All indications suggest that until he met his wife, he had no sexual contact with women. This was likely strongly connected with a deep insecurity in his relationships with women. He just didn't know how to deal with them or how he should behave around them.
He eventually overcame his sexual insecurities with a nurse, Margarete Boden. She was 7 years older. They married in 1928 and had a daughter, Gudrun. The man who would go on to order mass murder on an industrial scale was Heini, the doting father and family man.
Heini always was the lovely, nice uncle who was interested in the children, what they were up to, who brought them presents. He was the lovely uncle. And he seems to have been like that with his daughter too. It seems that his daughter also loved him very much and was always really looking forward to seeing him. Marga's diaries show how much she longed to see her father and missed him.
Work wasn't the only thing keeping Heinrich Himmler away from home. At the beginning of 1937, a merchant's daughter in her mid-20s was employed as his private secretary. Hedwig Potthast was soon managing more than his diary.
Purely physically, she had a clear age advantage. She seems to have been very pretty. She was 12 years younger than Heinrich Himmler, which means 19 years younger than Margot Himmler. And then she was a completely different personality.
A divorce was out of the question for Himmler. He saw a different and timely solution: to make cheating a matter of SS duty.
Himmler told his men that the most important thing is to have children during the war outside the marriage or inside a marriage. So the idea of a second marriage actually emerged at this time. The idea that SS men were legitimized to abandon their wives when they find younger, more attractive, more fertile partners. And so at the same time, when he propagated these ideas, he also had a mistress.
Himmler wanted to breed a racial elite within the SS while indulging in an extramarital affair. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, SS units were also sent to the front lines. Himmler feared that his bravest, most elite troops might die before they had a chance to sire members of a future SS master race. In October 1939, he issued the so-called procreation order. Producing children in or outside marriage was just as important as eliminating the enemy.
Himmler certainly saw the SS as being the cradle of a new master race. He's like a Bond villain in a way. I mean, he really does want to create a master race of people who will take over the world. And he wanted SS men who were racially pure, in inverted commas, who had to prove their lineage back to 1750. He wanted them to reproduce as much as possible. So he established things called Lebensborn, which are these homes in which SS men were encouraged to go and have sex with the women who lived there.
But conservative German officers saw Himmler's policy as an attack on traditional family values. The SS chief had to back down in public, but within his ranks, the so-called procreation order remained valid.
The idea of a second marriage was never abandoned among the SS, but it was more eternally propagated and was, after this critique from conservative officers, never again publicly announced.
Himmler had to keep extramarital affairs hidden, including his own. The affair with his secretary produced a son. He was born at the Hohenlychen Clinic, north of Berlin, in February 1942. Once reserved for the treatment of prominent Nazis, the crumbling, silent corridors now lie abandoned. This is the only known photograph of the SS chief's illegitimate son. On the birth certificate, the name of the father was left blank. 2 years later, Himmler officially admitted to the existence of his son and a second daughter. His secret second family was kept out of view in a remote Alpine lodge. It was the price Himmler's secretary had to pay for her affair. Hedwig Potthast's family was horrified. Not that she had Himmler's children, but that they were the product of an extramarital affair. The young mother had to give up her job as his secretary and only saw the SS chief now and then. He was busy orchestrating mass murder, or what he saw as the elimination of the subhuman enemies of the German Reich. Her lover was hell-bent on establishing a new world order under the black banner of the SS. The Renaissance castle at Wewelsburg was its shrine.
Himmler wanted to make Wewelsburg Castle, which he got on a 100-year lease, to be the kind of an operations center for his SS cult, if you like. And he adorned it with all kind of Nazi runes, black sun, floors. He had a kind of almost a table, very much like almost something out of Arthurian legend, where there'd be 12 chairs. Had Germany won the war, Himmler definitely wanted Wewelsburg to be expanded into a kind of SS training school, a place where they could receive sort of quasi-Nazi religious instruction. It was going to become almost kind of like the spiritual cradle of the Nazi myth machine.
But there was nothing mythical about the murderous plans Himmler outlined to a meeting of senior SS officers he gathered at Wewelsburg in 1941, just before Germany invaded the Soviet Union. It was a landmark declaration of the kind of war Himmler expected his men to wage in the East.
He spelled out in plain terms a vast task of mass murder, disguised as security, disguised as executing the enemies of the Reich. But everybody knew that ultimately what the men at that meeting at Wewelsburg were being asked to do was to conduct mass murder on an unprecedented scale.
Himmler was planning to make Hitler's vision of a great Germanic Reich a reality. The empire would extend from the North Sea in the west to the Caspian Sea in the east. But there was no room for Jews, Bolsheviks, Gypsies, or other so-called undesirables in their greater German Reich. The march eastwards began on the 22nd of June, 1941. The regular German army, or Wehrmacht, invaded the Soviet Union. SS units followed to wage a war of extermination against Bolshevism and Judaism.
Himmler had a very well-formed ideology. He believed that he was a warrior in a racial war, that it was his job to defend the Third Reich against its enemies, to destroy its enemies. And chief amongst those enemies was the